Hello and welcome to episode 283 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week we hear a lot about the huge energy demands of data centers and AI lately. China has opened a data center under the sea that will save 90% of its energy use. It's working so well, I'm thinking of podcasting from the bottom of my pool during heat waves.
The Boston Housing Authority is planning to install window heat pump units into one of their buildings. The units are often referred to as saddle-shaped for the way they drape over the windowsill. I prefer to think of them as Pringles potato chip-shaped. Pringles!
Not sponsored, but Pringles, give us a call. Our lines are always open 24/7. My family owns 2 electric vehicles. Both have been around for a long time and have recently gotten huge upgrades, bringing them up to current EV specs, finally. We look at the new Chevy Bolt and Nissan Leaf EVs that are coming out this year, which are the lowest priced EVs in North America. Having said that, I can't afford one at the moment, so I'm thinking of opening a data center at the bottom of my pool.
Delta Airlines is betting on hybrid airplanes. A hybrid airplane is like a Toyota Prius that flies, but with less legroom and worse snacks.
All that, your letters and the lightning round on this edition of the Clean Energy Show.
Okay, well, first of all, I've got a cold.
How? Where were you? You weren't on a plane?
What do you mean?
Where'd you get the cold from?
No, I think someone brought it into the house. I haven't been out that much.
Yeah, you should sterilize people when they come into the house.
Yes.
You're too old for cold, Brian. Too old.
No, I know, and it's time for the fall flu shots and the fall COVID shots, but I haven't had those yet. But anyway, yeah, I've been watching The Long Way Home on Apple TV, and I thought this was fun because back in the early days of the podcast, we talked a lot about Long Way Up, which was the previous series. And this is an Apple series. It was on some other network before Apple, but the last couple of iterations have been on Apple TV. And it's hosted by Ewan McGregor and his buddy, and they go on these long motorcycle road trips. And we both loved The Long Way Up from 2020 because they used these prototype Harley-Davidson Livewire electric motorcycles and prototype Rivians. Rivians weren't on the market yet in 2020, but they had some close to final prototypes. And so that last series, they did it very electric, and it was super interesting. They had to go from the tip of South America up to California, and the charging was not great. But, you know, it was super fun thing for people like us, very interested in electric vehicles. And 2020, only 5 years ago, but still very much the Wild West in terms of electrification of vehicles. So on the new series, they're not doing it fully electric. They're actually driving gas motorcycles. Ewan McGregor likes to collect old vehicles of many different kinds. So they're doing their trip on like 50-year-old gasoline motorcycles, which is fun in itself. They always have to think of a way to kind of raise the stakes in these things and make it more dramatic and more interesting. And, you know, having a 50-year-old motorcycle brings with it its own challenges and, you know, gives them something to talk about on the show.
Right.
But they do have, the Rivians are back. They're driving 2 Rivian trucks as support vehicles for this. And so far they haven't mentioned the brand name, so I don't think Rivian is sponsoring them this time, but they wanted to have electric support trucks. So there's 2 Rivians following them around. I think there's another camera guy on a motorcycle, something like that. So a whole pack of them go on this trip. And the first part of it is up through Scandinavia. They start in the UK, and they take a ferry and they end up driving up through Norway. So they haven't talked much about the clean energy aspects of this, but, you know, they sort of quickly mentioned that, oh, okay, well, driving these electric vehicles, the trucks shouldn't be a problem because they're going through Scandinavia and Norway has tons of charging and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't think Rivian is necessarily sponsoring them this time because they haven't really spoken about it at length. But anyway, they took a brief stop at like a maritime museum in Norway. I'm only about 3 episodes in, and it's, you know, probably 8 episodes or something. But they did a tour of this maritime museum in Norway, and they went inside one of these World War II submarines. And it was just something I wasn't really aware of, but they opened the sort of door in the bottom of the sub, and there's just a massive bank of lead acid batteries. And this is how these things used to work.
Don't those things off gas, though? I mean, wouldn't that be a bad place to off gas if lead acid batteries?
Yeah, that's true. It's like there's a danger of like a hydrogen explosion or something, isn't there?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe the batteries have been emptied of their liquids or something.
Sure.
It's just sitting there in a museum, so they don't need active batteries, but you can look down and you can see them. And so, yeah, apparently the way they used to work would be like a diesel engine or diesel generator when they were on the surface. But then when they needed to go underwater and go stealthy, they would run off these lead acid batteries. And it sounds like nuclear submarines today work in kind of the same way. They need that battery power for, when they're trying to, run quiet underneath the water. So I thought that was super interesting.
Well, going electric is always quieter. As Saturday, it was a beautiful day here where we are in Canada. It was 26 degrees, sunny, and my son had a project to do he was home from university, and he had to go look at a street in our city downtown. And so I went with him and went for a walk from one major street to the other and had a look at this whole place. And I saw two things, Brian, of interest.
Yeah.
One was an electric motorcycle. I saw an electric motorcycle for the first time go by.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really high powered, but it wasn't e-bikey either. It was a lower powered, I would say, electric motorcycle, probably didn't have a huge amount of range, but maybe 100 kilometers, I'm guessing. And it was quiet. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of things going by that were noisy. And this thing went by, and it was the first time I've seen a full, motorcycles are loud.
Very often.
My neighbors all have them for some reason, and they're loud. The other thing I saw was an old car from the 70s, like a muscle car of some sorts. The ones that have the gas cap under the back license plate?
Yeah.
That used to happen sometimes when we were kids. Well, he didn't have a gas cap on, and he must have just filled up the tank. And when he accelerated, a whole crap load of gas came out, and we were just choking on it. And we had to walk down the whole place that he had driven, and we were still choking on it. And it eventually faded away from evaporation because it was a nice day. And long story short, 22 hours later, it snowed.
Yeah.
It's just that's the way it is.
Rapid change in weather.
I wanted to, as a podcaster, congratulate Mark Maron, because Mark Maron is an old-time podcaster. He's been doing it for a while. Did his last show this week, and it's because of him and other people like him that we are here, that we exist. And after being fired from a radio show, comedian Mark Maron launched the podcast WTF from his garage in 2009, desperate for a creative outlet. He was kind of a middling comedian. He wasn't terribly successful.
Yeah.
And since his podcast has gained notoriety, it became a landmark show for its raw, emotionally honest, and long-form conversations. I remember when Barack Obama showed up at his garage in Glendale, California, like east of downtown Los Angeles, near the Rose Bowl. Like his helicopter landed at the Rose Bowl field, and there was an entourage that came to Mark Maron's place during, I think it was 2015. So he's interviewed a lot of fellow comedians and president and Paul McCartney and things like that, evolving from a podcast pioneer into, some say, a cultural institution. And it's revitalized his career, which he doesn't need to do podcasting anymore. He's got a lot of acting gigs now. He's had a sitcom, lots of acting roles after 16 years and 1,700 episodes. Mark Maron ended it this week with his second interview with Barack Obama.
Well, we're at 283, so it's not 1,700, but, that's nothing to sneeze at for us.
It's a retirement date, yeah. He does a lot better than we do, but that's congratulations, Mark.
So from Canary Media, Boston Housing Authority is trying out heat pumps in one of their buildings. Have you ever been to Boston, James?
No.
No, I haven't either. So heat pumps in a housing authority building in Boston. It's framed in many ways as a clean energy story, and this is from Canary Media. But really, it's more of a money story because as you delve into it, you find out that this apartment building is currently heated with electric resistance heating, which means this is a no-brainer to upgrade to a heat pump.
Oh, yeah.
Which is electric heating, but just, much more efficiently. It's called the Hassan Apartments. It's a 50-year-old public housing community with about 100 apartments for older people and adults with disabilities. And they're going with these gradient heat pump units that we've talked about before. These are the saddle-shaped units that hang on your windowsill rather than a normal, air conditioner type unit, which sits in the window. This one drapes down on either side. You have an outside part, an inside part, and they seem like a very a clever design, very efficient design. And so they're trying this out with about 100 units, replacing regular resistive heat, which is super inefficient. So that's a real win. There's 2 other Massachusetts housing agencies that are doing the same thing with some of these gradient heat pumps. The Chelsea Housing Authority and the Lynn Housing Authority. They're each trying out a few hundred of these. They're about 140 pounds, and it takes about a half an hour for one of these to be installed. It's not that hard because they plug into a regular, 120 volt outlet. So basically you just got to hang them in the window, make sure they're not going to fall out of the window and crush somebody, and, not too difficult. So the stats here, the average lifetime cost, they're expecting to be about $14,500 per apartment. And that includes, the energy use over the years that it's going to last, compared to $22,000 to $30,000 for a large-scale heat pump system. So they decided to go with individual units in individual apartments rather than a whole building solution. So these are about $5,500 each for each unit, but they're going to save about $60,000 per year in energy costs. So if you multiply the 100 units by the $5,500, so this whole install is going to cost about $545,000, but they're going to save $60,000 a year in their energy costs. So this very much seems like a no-brainer here. The article goes on to explain about something similar in New York City. The New York City Housing Authority has a project called Woodside Houses, and they're going from a gas-powered steam system to these similar types of window units, and they expect the energy consumed to drop by 85 to 88% based on their preliminary results. That's the cost of heating. And that does sound like kind of maybe unrealistically large, right? That they're going to save 85 to 88% on the energy costs. But a spokesperson for this company, Gradient, that makes the heat pumps, it says, "We roughly know the reasons why it's so extreme. It seems unrealistically large, but waste really abounds with the fossil fuel systems of this type. Boilers don't perfectly convert fuel into heat. Steam leaks on its way to apartments, and residents lacking control over the temperature are prone to throw open windows if they're overheating," he noted. User-controlled window heat pumps avoid all of those issues. So if you've ever lived in an apartment building with, steam radiators, it's pretty much always a problem getting the heat right, and you end up, opening a window in winter.
I've seen people open them in minus 30s Celsius, like really cold weather, because the colder it is, the hotter sometimes the heat works. And if you've got too much in your apartment, or if you're on a third floor, people will open their windows and waste all that heat.
Yeah, because it kind of takes forever for that, radiator to get hot, but then it stays hot and you often have very little control in your apartment.
Okay, well, I like the fact that you can close the windows, because the saddle design allows you to close the windows further, and you don't have to have a larger opening for a leaky, air conditioner.
And it doesn't ruin your entire view of, you can still get light through a lot of the windows since it's hanging down. So those units are very cool.
The air conditioner is a heat pump that works, takes heat out of your apartment, pumps it outside, and this works in reverse and just as efficient, and sometimes 3 times as efficient or even more than the resistive heating that they had, which is just basically like a toaster. You're just using all the electricity to create a hot, a positive and negative together to heat a glowing wire or whatever.
Yeah. And if it's a large apartment, you might need more than one, but, a small apartment easily be heated and cooled, of course, because you get both. You get heating and cooling. It's just one of these units.
And you could control, if you did have multiple units, you had one in the bedroom, one in the living room, for example, in the window, then you could control that the way you like it. You might have it a bit warmer in your living room and cooler when you sleep. That would be me. So I've got 2 cars, Brian. I've got a old Nissan Leaf. It's 2013. It's going. Hopefully, it may get some suspension repair at my daughter's high school. She talked to the shop teacher there. So I hope that's okay. I hope they don't call and say, no, it's electric. We can't go near electricity. But there's no electricity where the suspension is, really. And they're not dealing with, he said, as long as we don't deal with the motor, we're fine. So that might get fixed, which would be nice. And I've got my little 12-volt heater installed for the window, because winter is nigh. No, it's not nigh. And suddenly arrived for some stupid reason. Went from summer to winter in one day. So that Chevy Bolt I have as well is the 2023, and that was the last year they made it. They sort of had this last year as the 2023 model year. It lasted almost 2 model years, 2 calendar years. It's a popular car. They sold a lot of them. There was the number one selling electric vehicle for Chevy, for GM for a while. But they've finally announced the new one that they said they would bring it back from popular demand. And here's the big caveat. They're saying it's temporary, that they're only bringing it back temporarily for some reason. They haven't said why. Maybe they'll replace it with something else. I don't know. But it is there was basically 2 models. There was the EUV, which is a bit bigger, a bit boxier. And that's what they're bringing back. They're just calling it the Chevy Bolt, but it is a little bigger than our little car, which might be good for us because we need a couple of inches from my partner. Puts the child seats in for her job in the back seat. It has a heat pump, which is nice because our current car doesn't have a heat pump.
Yeah.
It has resistive heating. So the heat pump is, like we just said, is more efficient. And, the heater uses a lot of your battery when you're dealing with the car, but it uses up your range when it gets very cold to heat that cabin, that keep you toasty warm. But a heat pump in weather like this, where it's not minus 15, like anywhere between plus 10 and minus 15 Celsius, that's probably the sweet spot for heat pumps. Our car peaked charged at 54 kilowatts, which is like a fifth, almost a fifth of what your car charges at your Tesla, your new Tesla. And that's slow, right? That was a problem on the highway. Now, I managed in the summer pretty well. I didn't think it was that terrible, but the new one will charge 10 to 80%, which is what you do on the highway. You probably don't let it go down below 10% because you're worried about, range, as you would be in a gas car. And you don't charge it above 80% because it takes a lot longer. It takes as long to go, the top 20% as the bottom 70%. So you charge to 10 to 80% typically when you're traveling on the highway. It's going to do that in only 26 minutes, which is very, very good. For 100, it's charging at 150 kilowatts, but that also means the charging curve is good, that it will do pretty good in that charging curve compared to, say, the Nissan Leaf, which I'll talk about in a second. So it is a little bit larger, and the range is about the same. It's got an LFP battery. Those are the batteries that have the lithium iron phosphate chemistries. Those are cheaper. They're less energy dense. There's probably going to be a heavier battery there than there was before for the same amount of energy, but you can charge it to 100%, not worry about it. It's got Google operating system. It's kind of cool because it's got vehicle to home. Now, that's when you can output a lot of power out of your vehicle to power your house. But you need a special hardware to do that. You got to get an electrician in and put that in this little box, and it can work with solar, apparently. There's not a lot of details. All the details aren't involved yet. But that is something you could do, and it's got 9-point-something kilowatts, which is enough to power a big house with everything running if you wanted to. It'd only do it for a few hours. If you had a hurricane and you wanted to power it for a week, I wouldn't turn on everything in the house. I would use very moderate air conditioning if you're in Florida and stuff like that. But yeah, it's got that. And I believe the new Leaf does as well. So these are both the cheapest vehicles in North America, and they both have new versions, finally. Like, my vehicle is really old, and they haven't done much to it in that time. They gave it a styling improvement, but it was always frustrating when they improved the range. Like, it was never enough range. Like, it was never anything more than a city car. Like, even when they upped the range, it was frustrating over many, many years. So this new one has 255 miles of range in the Chevy Bolt. The nice thing about it, though, is that it also has something that you've had in your Teslas, and that is preheating the battery, preconditioning the battery. You can do it manually, which is nice to have that option, because some cars you can't just turn it on when you want it, but you have to do it through the route mapping. You have to, navigate somewhere, and it'll say, okay, you got to stop here, and we'll heat the battery so it charges fast. Now, that's important at all times of the year. It may be less so when it's like 80, 90 degrees outside, when it's hot outside in the summer, and the battery's going to probably be at optimal temperature anyway. And maybe it'll be even cooled a bit to get it down to that temperature, which is around 27 to 30 degrees, depending on the battery, which is optimal. But around here, when you charge in winter, when it gets cold, when it gets below freezing, and certainly when it gets really cold like it does here, those batteries charge slow. But you had an experience with your Tesla in the minus 30s, where you said it charged just as fast as it did in the summer because you preconditioned the battery and it heated it up.
Yeah, my partner drove from Prince Albert to then Saskatoon and then Davidson. And the first leg was kind of short. It was like only a 1 hour drive, and it still charged kind of slow at the first charging stop. By the time it hit the next charging stop, like an hour later, yeah, it was at full power. Like it was 250 kilowatts charging and it was minus 35 Celsius.
That's impressive. That's really impressive because, yeah, you would lose range because of the cold, thick air and because of the tires and everything else, and the battery being a little bit cold. But the fact that you can keep that battery temperature, and I've complained about this before, that people don't make cars for our particular 6 million people in the Prairie provinces. But in that case, Tesla finally, after much experience with this, has got it right. I think.
And of course, you will lose some range from that. Like heating the battery takes energy, so you will lose a bit of range for that. So, but as long as your charging stops aren't too far apart, it's not an issue.
My car has the same range, a similar price. The prices are going to be sub $30,000 US, but my car would charge in 75 minutes instead of 26, 54 kilowatts max, which was very brief, by the way.
Yeah.
So I didn't even bother, a 50 kilowatt charger was fine because the 4 kilowatts I was losing wasn't a big deal because it was only for a few minutes. But now, if I had one, I would have to seek out faster chargers, but only 150 kilowatt chargers, which are a lot more common than the faster chargers, unless you go to Tesla, which you can because it has an AX port. It has the Tesla port on it and only the Tesla port. Yeah. So a person buying this car could go to Tesla all the time, although here it's a bit pricey, especially for non-Tesla users. You can get a monthly subscription, which makes it a bit cheaper. So, yeah. It has a plug-in charge, which is nice. You can just plug it in, but not for Tesla. GM has decided not to do that for Tesla, and I hate that. You should be. Other brands have been able to plug and charge at Teslas, not just Tesla, but I think Ford and maybe Rivian. You could just plug in and it'll just bill you from there. So it's 9.6 kilowatts for vehicle to home. You get optional Super Cruise in these cars, so it's kind of like self-driving on the highway, and it'll even take you into the lane turnoffs, and it'll tell you to take over once you do get into that exit lane.
Yep.
Cargo room on this little car, Brian, is bigger than the Equinox when you put the seats down.
Yeah.
Even though the Equinox is 20 inches longer. So
weird.
Now, the Nissan Leaf, the third generation of this car, is a pretty major improvement. The Leaf has always been a bit bigger than the Bolt. Mm-hmm. So, it's got a little bit more room. It's wider. It's a bigger car, but it's always had less range. The thing about the Bolt was it was the first non-Tesla to come out that had really good range, but it wasn't a highway car. It wasn't a road tripping car because it charged so slow. So you really had to have patience like I did in order to use it for that. But the Nissan Leaf was launched in 2010. And boy, was I following every development when that was coming out. The world's first mass-produced electric car. And it was for the 2011 model year. Tesla was working on things behind the scenes, and they were trying to come out with the Model S, which was, not very accessible. It was very expensive, the Model S. It's bigger than the Bolt. When, the Bolt came out a few years later, I think in 2015. And the heat pump is there. If you get the larger battery on, you'll get a heat pump on that too. I had the option of getting a heat pump even on my car, which would have been nice because my heater's broken. Yeah. My resistive heater's broken. I would have had the backup heat pump, which would have been glorious compared to nothing. So I wish I had that. And if I do get another one, and I might, you never know, if I get the chance, I might get another one to replace this one. I would make sure I had the heat pump option with those older Leafs. So you can activate heating and cooling from afar. You do also have manual and automatic preconditioning of the battery, which makes it a usable vehicle. Yeah. And interestingly, Brian, you know how there was like 4 cities in our province, and only one of them, the far northern small city, had a certified Nissan dealership? That's expanded now. Oh, yeah. So Saskatoon has one and Yorkton has one, but not here. Not here where we live, where the tech told someone in our EV community when hell freezes over, will they certify as an electric Nissan dealer? And hell has not frozen over yet. In fact, it's getting kind of melty in hell. So, yeah, that's nice to have that. So it's a real car. They're not fooling around. And the important thing with the Leaf is it never had active heating and cooling. It just had air cooling, and that sometimes wrecked the batteries if you're in Arizona.
Yeah, air cooled rather than having, liquid that can run through the battery to heat it and cool it.
And that does a much better job than just blowing some air through it when you're dealing with a big, heavy battery that's 1,000 pounds. So it's actually cheaper than the original Nissan Leaf when it came out by $3,000 US. So, and does a lot more. Like the original Leaf is basically my Leaf, which had 80 miles, 85 miles of range or something, which was nothing. And this one has 255. I'll get to that in a second. It also has vehicle to load interior outlets, which is very cool. So you have 110 volt outlets. You could go camping off grid and be able to run whatever you want. You could run a heater if you wanted to off that sucker. Yeah, and it's got NACS ports too. It's got the Tesla port. So as everyone has said, all the car brands are switching to this Tesla standard of adapter, because it's so much more light and elegant and works. It's such a better thing. It's not even funny. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it is now the standard for North America.
It's the difference between, picking up a weasel and an elephant. Yeah. It's just, it's two different animals altogether. So they all are also doing 150 kilowatt charging on that NACS port, but their 10 to 80 is 35 minutes instead of 26 minutes in the Bolt. So that means their charging curve isn't quite as good, or their battery is because it's a bigger car, so they're less efficient.
Those max charge rates never last forever, but the charging curve just is a more precise measure of exactly how long it takes for that max charge rate to dip.
So it can power your home as well, but only at 3.4 kilowatts, which is a third of what the Bolt can do. Now, I'm not saying a lot of people do that, but if you live in the country with intermittent power, or if you live in a place with storms, that's an important thing to you. Or if you're rich and you just want to have it because you can't deal with a power outage for an hour. So there's no true one pedal driving, which is a bummer in the Leaf, because they still don't have that. We use that in the Bolt, but then we ran into the problem with the Bolt that the brakes never get used, and we had to have service on the brakes because they didn't get used. They rusted. Yeah. So now I have to make sure I hit the brakes really hard every 2 weeks. Yeah. If you don't hit them hard, you're just using regenerative braking. You're just running the electric motor in reverse and creating electricity for the battery.
And you can scare some old people crossing the road in the process, and that's just a bonus.
I love bonuses. So that's what it is, and it's exciting. Those are the two cheapest EVs, more or less, in North America. In the UK and Europe and Oceania, you're probably getting some Chinese vehicles, which are a bit cheaper than, the market for vehicles, even with some tariffs on them. Yeah. But right here, we have a problem in North America with cheap EVs. Yeah. It's a bit of an issue.
No, and in the lightning round, I know we're going to talk about the average cost of a new car now in North America, which is crazy.
Sit down for that one, people. It's nuts.
Absolutely nuts. All right, from Electrek, Delta Airlines is betting on hybrid airplanes. And we've talked many times about how aviation is going to be one of the most difficult things to decarbonize. And it's a shame that no one was thinking about this maybe many years ago, but hybrid airplanes are possible, much in the same way that a hybrid car is, with, gasoline and electric drive as well. So Delta Airlines, they're teaming up with the Dutch aviation startup Mave Aerospace, and they have a more advanced fuel-sipping hybrid electric aircraft powertrain. And they announced this back in 2023, but they're getting closer now. This is not actually in use yet, but Delta has committed to working with them. And they think this could reduce the company's fuel consumption on these specific routes. And these are more of a regional aircraft, so not super long distance. But it should cut the fuel costs about 40%. So that in itself is probably the reason to do it. Jet fuel is super expensive, and it's a massive, massive expense for airlines. So it absolutely makes sense to do it just from a money perspective, if nothing else. But of course, this is cleaner with fewer emissions. So the Mave aircraft is called the M80, and it's an 80-seater that they announced back in 2023. It's a cost-effective aircraft designed to satisfy the needs of the majority of regional airports and operators. It's going to have a range of more than 900 miles, or about 1,500 kilometers, with that fuel efficiency, very much in the same way that, a Toyota Prius works, and very much in the same instances. So, when an airplane is taking off is when it has massive, massive fuel use. And electric motors are great for that. And a Prius can do the same thing. When you're accelerating, use the electric motor. And then when you're cruising on the highway, you use the gas engine. And these hybrid aircraft are going to do exactly the same thing. And of course, they can drive around the airport on the tarmac in electric mode. And then you just don't get those emissions that you normally get. It's always nasty to stand anywhere near an airport outdoors and have to breathe in all those fumes.
So you get a whiff of it when you board a flight.
Yeah.
And I have to think that the workers there breathe in a lot of bad stuff. I mean, diesel's bad, but jet fuel's got to be worse. Yeah. It's a step worse.
But yeah, just like in a Prius, where if you're, say, driving into a parking garage or something, you can just put it into electric mode, right? So you're not, belting out those fumes.
Yeah, somebody was asking me, James, you're talking about air quality all the time. What part of the city should you live in? And I said, well, I thought about it for a minute. I thought, well, maybe down by the airport in a place called Harbor Landing. And then I said, well, wouldn't there be emissions from the airport? And I said, well, we only got a few flights per day, so it would probably blow away.
We don't have a super busy airport, and the wind direction probably would usually work in your favor there.
But if we had electrified planes, that's better too. And another thing about electrified planes is that they can use the electric motor when they're landing, and that sort of opens up more airports. You can some airports they want you closed at a certain hour.
Oh yeah.
So this, expands the amount of airports that the short hop flights might be able to use.
Yeah, just because of the noise, you mean? Just because it will be quiet?
Yeah, because they'll be allowed to use more airports. I was just thinking, I was looking at the oil price that we look at in Canada for WTI crude. It's at under $60 a barrel today, $58.76 at the moment of recording this. And I was thinking, the lower, we think that oil prices will go down because of the transition, and that will only probably make air travel cheaper and increase air travel. So it's an issue, I think, in the future that we need to... it takes so long to certify a flight to a plane.
Yes.
This is what the eVTOLs are finding, that some of them are going out of business because everything you develop, you can't just put it on the road like a car.
Yeah.
You need to get it certified. And that's true with Harbour Air in Vancouver, in British Columbia, Canada. They're taking these seaplanes and electrifying them, but it's taking forever to get certified before you can put passengers on them. So it's an issue.
And there's good reason for that, of course. Like if anything should have really strict safety standards, it is airplanes because, God knows none of us wants to go down that way.
No.
But yes, even we talked one time about even changing out like the air circulation system on an airplane is a huge, huge deal because you can't just do it. You have to do it and then get it approved by all of these safety organizations to make sure nothing's going to go wrong. But I
don't even think you can put a new in-flight entertainment system in either because that's caused crashes. So those have to be certified if you want to upgrade your your video screens or whatever.
Yeah, or just the Wi-Fi. So I think it's an interesting and useful development. I wish they'd started doing this 20 years ago. It seems like once the Toyota Prius came out that maybe they could have started thinking about this back then because it just makes sense, just from an efficiency standpoint. Use those high torque electric motors when you need them the most.
Okay, China is opening the world's first underwater data center. You heard me right?
Yeah.
What's a data center? A data center is a bunch of computers that run at high processing all the time and create a lot of heat. So you have to cool that, and that uses energy. I think that it uses more energy to cool them than it does to actually do the processing. So that's why we're always talking about AI, data centers and having their own nuclear plants for them behind a fence and all that stuff. So China, I guess this has been done by Microsoft in 2014. They did an experiment like this once. But it wasn't viable. This one's actually commercially running now, so it's of note for that reason. They say it's going to use 90% less energy. Now, if that's true, then, the heating or the cooling of these must use a lot of energy.
Yes.
Compared to the actual processing. So, all these things are running, and it creates, if you live near one, you will hear fans because it'll be high-speed fans ventilating these places, and people complain about that. So what is the data center? It's a physical warehouse of servers that power the internet. Yes, you're probably listening to us because data center served you our file. If you surf the internet, do anything. YouTube, ask AI a question. It'll use a bunch of water and energy to answer that question for you. Massive amounts of electricity get used, mostly for cooling, and AI is making this worse because more computing means more heat and higher energy bills for these companies. But the solution could be what the Chinese firm Highlander is doing. They're testing a giant yellow pod full of servers off the coast of Shanghai, and it may be the world's first commercial running underwater data center. And underwater cooling is natural because the ocean currents are cool and cold. They keep the servers cool and they move away.
Yeah.
They save 90% of the energy if normally needed, as I said, on land. And the pod sits on the ocean floor. Seawater removes heat naturally. It's powered almost entirely by offshore wind farms, which is kind of cool too, because that makes it about 95% renewable. The steel capsule is coated with glass flakes to resist corrosion. To be an engineer, to be able to come up with that stuff and patent it, you probably live in a mansion forever. Gold-plated mansion. An elevator links the underwater pod to a surface access point for maintenance. So, an elevator. So you go to the surface, you get out of the elevator, you go down to the bottom to service the data center.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have a scuba tank with you for backup, but I wouldn't want to do that. Yeah, Microsoft did test one in Scotland in 2018. 2018.
Yeah.
It worked, but they didn't go commercial with it, basically. China's project aims to prove it can be scaled up and profitable. There are some challenges, though, as you can imagine. Technical hurdles are keeping electronics dry.
Sure.
It's important.
That's important.
And protected from salt water. Complex internet cabling between the sea and the land. Maintenance access under pressure and at depth. So it's like, going into a submersible to the IT guys. Going down into a pressurized situation. There's some ecological concerns. It could warm the surrounding water, affecting marine life. They don't know. They need to test that and do studies. Early tests show minimal impact, however, but larger systems might release more heat. There's lots of government support, as there always is in China. China's government is backing the project with subsidies. There's like $5.6 million US for a similar project in Hainan province. Expert opinions? Well, researchers say it's promising.
Yeah.
But still experimental. Still waiting to see, Brian. Still waiting to see.
Well, it seems likely that it will work, but, is the cost going to be manageable enough? And, the risks of people, dying underwater trying to service the thing. In that Ewan McGregor show, they visited the submarine museum and they showed the sort of torpedo tubes, and they have a dummy human in one of these torpedo tubes to sort of demonstrate the fact that this is how they used to release like scuba divers out of the submarines. They would have to crawl.
Really?
They would have to crawl into the torpedo tubes, and then with their scuba gear on, and it slowly fills up with water, and then they get shot out of the submarine. Another thing I would not want to do.
What do they do when they get shot out, though? What is their purpose?
Well, if you ever need, scuba divers for something.
Well, landmines, ocean mines,
all of that.
Spine. Yeah. Okay. Well, they don't think these underwater centers are going to replace all data centers, but I think it might complement it. But it's an interesting, interesting idea to save energy because it is going to be a big issue in the future.
Sounds great. Just not sure about the cost. All right. It's time to slip into the mailbag. Hi, James and Brian. Linda and I just listened to your October bonus show. James, you talked quite a bit about air quality in your part of Regina due to the steel plant and the oil refineries. I, Denny, grew up in the 1960s and 70s in Port Huron, Michigan. Our house was 1 block from the St. Clair River, border between Michigan and Ontario. We were directly across the river from Sarnia's oil refineries. They are on the eastern side of the river. We were probably more lucky than our Canadian friends and neighbors because the prevailing winds in this part of the country are from the west. But we often had either very little or no wind, as you commented, this happens in your area too, and the pollutants from the oil plants would just hang in the air. It was especially notable in the summertime. These pollutants could sometimes be so pervasive that the odor would make it hard to sleep at night.
Oh my.
Yeah, this was when very few of us had the luxury of air conditioning in our homes. Our windows would be open all summer long. You said you were looking into cancer rates in your area. I believe where we lived, they would be similar. I know at some point, maybe in the 1980s, the Canadian government forced the refineries to capture more of their toxins. By the way, they would often dump pollutants into the St. Clair River. Many towns on both sides of the river get their drinking water from that river, too.
No.
This is like an Aaron Brockovich kind of situation.
Yeah.
It goes on. You've talked about the indoor air quality monitor you got from Amazon for $60 plus and have found ways to use it in your yard to measure VOCs. You mentioned you might buy another one and test air quality around the city. Lynn and I may do the same thing to see what the VOC rates are around the Port Huron area. I'd be curious if you have listeners in the Sarnia area that might want to comment as well. Today, Linda and I live about 15 miles northwest of those plants, but when we walk along the river, those pollutants must still be present. We love your show, both of you. Keep up the great work, Denny and Linda. Thanks so much for the letter.
Yeah. Glad to hear you're both still alive under these circumstances. I did buy a second air quality monitor for $59.99 during the Amazon Prime Day deal or whatever, and it's now in my house, but I can take that. It's a bit tricky because I have to set it up. Yeah, Amazon stuff now just sort of takes the Wi-Fi network you have on your account and automatically goes there, but I have to set up to work with my phone and then drive around the city with it. And it's kind of, there's certain conditions where I want to do that, where it's just a steady wind from one direction, but a lot of times it's variable because I've been watching wind meters around the city, one at the airport, one at this guy's house near me. And yeah, when I look at the history, the graph of the volatile organic compounds, those are the bad things that come from pollutants, as well as particulate matter. But in the case of the refinery, apparently they're filtering out a lot of the actual particulate matter of all sizes. The steel mill, not so much. I'm finding that's not the case there. But I can go back and look at the history from the weather office to see what the wind was doing, and I can see, okay, well, it calmed down, and, at night, and then the VOC shot up. And a lot of times overnight, this has been so far summer, now we're into winter, so things could, be work differently. We'll see. We'll talk about it as we go along. But yeah, you'll see a spike for like an hour or maybe 3 hours of just because the wind pattern was there. And it's not an exact measurement. It's just an index that Amazon Air Quality has, between 0 and 100. And, 3, 4 is not smellable, but you really don't want to be breathing the air with those particular compounds in them, because the book that stated all the terrible things that can come out of that refinery. And a lot of times what they're doing, Denny, is they're dumping, something breaks or something, and they have to dump a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
They have to report that to the government. So this book chapter that I had on the refinery looked at the stats from the government, and they were a few years old, but they were dumping more than any other refinery in Canada for whatever reason. And yeah, so it's not an ongoing thing. Does it happen at night? When the workers were on strike, they were pointing out horrible gases. They say, hey, look, we're at the picket line, but look where they're doing. You can see that they're dumping this gas and hydrogen sulfide or whatever. Yeah, so it's an ongoing thing, and I'm like I said, if you smell it, it's bad, but to see the numbers that are there, you can tell, you correlate the stuff with the wind, and you can see that it went up. Which did it come from? The steel mill or the refinery? And it was always one of the two. And it's almost always the refinery, but the particulate matter from the steel mill is an issue too. So it's like, there's lots of cities like this. There's lots of cities that have petrochemical plants nearby, oil refineries, other oil operations, steel, other factories, certainly in China. But, we're a small center and we still have terrible air. We should have beautiful, clean air.
Yeah.
The cleanest that anyone has ever seen. But we don't, because we have these industries, and they are important because they have, the politicians just buckle to whatever they want.
And it's real bad when you can smell it, but chances are it's also bad when you can't smell it.
Yeah. I want to see how far it goes. I want to see, that's going to take me a while to do, but I'm going to find out how far it goes and see if it even reaches your house, and you actually live in probably one of the better places because of the wind direction is not great for you, but you might get bad air I've also been looking at the other air quality monitors too, like on the map, and sometimes they don't jive.
Yeah.
And the reason is because some of them are picking up pollutants and others aren't. So it's not good. Well, we'd love to hear from you, like Denny and Linda. You can always contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. That's our email, Clean Energy Show, kind of old-fashioned, but drop us that line there. You can also talk to us on our Discord if you're on Patreon, or leave us a comment on our Patreon page. As far as TikTok, we had a viral video there last week. I'm not reading the comments, but you know what I like?
Yeah.
Is sometimes they have AI that will summarize the comments for you.
So it just uses several gallons of water and many...
Yes, it does. It does. It uses gallons of water, but then I don't have to shed gallons of tears reading insults. And one of the reasons why our videos go viral is everyone starts arguing in the comments. So that increases the algorithm of it. And I hate arguing, especially with people who don't know what they're talking about. You can also leave us a voicemail online at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. Join the conversation, like I said, on our Patreon page and get access to additional content. Thank you for everyone who's supporting our show. Coming up next, of course, is the lightning round. Time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
The 2025 Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to Susumu Katawa, Omar M. Yaki, and Richard Robson for their pioneering work on metal organic frameworks, a new form of molecular architecture with potential to combat climate change. These porous materials have large internal cavities and can be custom designed to capture carbon dioxide, or even harvest water from the air and store gases, and even catalyze chemical reactions. So,
nice.
Climate change-related chemistry Nobel Prize there. New vehicle average transaction price, we were talking about this earlier, in the United States. This is the average transaction price of a new vehicle in the United States, all-time high. It's over $50,000, $50,080 in September.
Wow.
Which is, my first house was $50,000 Canadian.
Yeah.
You know, $50,000 is like a house and a half of my first house. So, yeah, that is the first time it's ever surpassed $50,000, according to Kelley Blue Book.
Yeah, and just a straight conversion to Canadian dollars would peg that at 70,000 Canadian.
Is that right?
Our vehicles do tend to be more expensive here, so that 70,000 figure is probably accurate. I wasn't able to confirm that, but yeah, 50,000 US dollars or about 70,000 here in Canada for a new vehicle. That's insane.
Well, people are buying pickup trucks. That's the number one selling vehicle in North America. Those aren't cheap. You know what's happening? We've been long expecting, even before the podcast, for electric vehicle prices to fall.
Yeah.
What they are doing is kind of staying the same.
Yeah.
Where everything else is going up.
That's true.
You know, like the Leaf. The Leaf was $3,000 cheaper than, the original price of when it came out, and does a whole lot more, plus inflation and all that. So it's actually pretty significantly cheaper, whereas other cars are going up. But yeah, when you look at some of these cars and I think, $28,500 American, I can afford that. And then you do the currency exchange, but then you add another 10% because they don't do it at the exact, currency exchange. They add more when you buy something here. And I know that's true for Australia and some other countries as well.
Those prices of, the Bolt and the Leaf at under 30,000 as a starting price, that's starting to look real good. And then you don't have to pay for gas.
Robert Wright says, Trump's big, beautiful bill, his big, beautiful bill, contains more than $40 billion in subsidies and tax breaks for big oil. So he's going socialist there, The Trump administration, big on socialism. Duracell, the battery maker, those are the ones with the Energizer has a bunny. What does Duracell have?
Right.
Nothing. The copper top. Duracell's first ever fast EV charger network will be in the UK, and they look like big batteries. They're branded like Duracell batteries. It looks weird to me.
I see the picture there. They look like a rectangular kind of AA cell, but large.
So Duracell, they thought, all this battery stuff, we got to get out of that. We got to throw our brand behind that. Well, it's time for a CES Fast Fact. Green hydrogen was just 1% of global hydrogen production in 2024. Green hydrogen is made with renewables. Other hydrogen is made with sometimes fossil fuels and energy-intensive things.
Yeah, and green hydrogen holds a lot of promise, but if it's only 1% of current global hydrogen production, that's not good.
We got to get that up. With the current hydrogen that's getting produced, it has to be replaced with green hydrogen. Then we got to make more green hydrogen and use that for whatever we need to use it for during the energy transition. Plane, shipping, long-range trucking, perhaps. Ember says gas was more expensive, that is natural gas, than coal this year in the United States to expand electricity production. So if you're going to build something, it was cheaper to build coal than natural gas. So natural gas has been always the cheap thing that was displacing coal. But because of those turbine problems with the supply chain and the high demand for them, that it's very expensive. So it's not cheaper right now. But solar is meeting half of the demand growth in the United States, which is encouraging. So all the electricity that was expanded in the United States, half of it was solar. Canada's managed forests, which comprise 230 million hectares, seem to be shedding carbon. By the late 20th century, they will be typically a carbon sink. Now, thanks to increases in natural disturbances, they are a growing source of carbon in the atmosphere, unfortunately, and hopefully, as one of our previous writers, Glenn, said, we better do something about that. The IEA reports that there's an IEA report that claims fossil fuel imports have declined in more than 100 countries.
Wow.
So if you're importing fossil fuels, that's not a good position to be in to begin with. So those countries are the ones who are going big on renewables. And not so much here in our petro state of Canada. BYD Seagull, that's one of, I think it's BYD's, the Chinese automaker's most popular car. It's just a little hatchback. It's kind of like the Bolt in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But it's a great car by all accounts. Is named one of Time Magazine's best inventions of 2025. Why? Because it's important in making the world better, smarter, and more sustainable. And of course, they're selling gobs of them in all kinds of countries, like countries you wouldn't expect. Chinese brands took 13% of the UK new car market in September. 13% of new cars were Chinese brands, and dealers in the UK have told auto analyst Michael Dunn that it's going to be 30%, they expect, in 2 years.
Yeah, and if we didn't have the massive tariffs on Chinese EVs, we'd probably be having something similar here.
Here's a shocker, Brian. Deep Sky is investing $500 million in new direct air capture facility in Manitoba, next to us, the province next to us, east of us.
Yeah.
You know, we hear about this in Nordic countries and in faraway places from us, and Manitoba doesn't seem like the place to do it. And some people say this is, they use more energy than the carbon they've captured. This isn't working so far at all. But yeah, it's going to be one of the largest in the world, designed to pull 500,000 tons of CO2 from the air every year. And that story is in the Globe and Mail if you want to read more about that. And finally, this week from the Financial Times, battery costs are down 50% versus 18 months ago.
Wow.
This is mostly batteries for grid storage, which is really important because renewables are variable, not intermittent. They vary in the amount of output, so you need to have batteries for that. And we talk about falling battery prices. Wouldn't it be great to be 18% a year? Because some years they're down 18%. Well, this is 50% in a year and a half, which is really hugely significant and hugely important for us to decarbonize the planet. And all accounts suggest it's going to keep going. Like those prices declines because of improvements in technology and chemistries and deployment and mass production, all that. Learning curves, a standard 20-foot storage container, which is what these things are. They're like a container in the back of a truck or on a train, a storage shipping container. They're 20 feet long. They once provided 3 to 4 megawatt hours. So 3 to 4 megawatts for an hour or however you want to look at that. Mm-hmm. And now they typically deliver 5 to 6 megawatt hours, with several suppliers, as we've mentioned, developing 10 megawatt containers, which is enough to power 30,000 homes for an hour. Like one little shipping container to power a city of 30,000 people for an hour is nuts. I'm sorry, that's just crazy.
Yeah,
it's futuristic naughtiness. It doesn't make any sense. It's breaking my head. In 2022, there was only a single gigawatt scale facility. That is a facility is having a capacity of 1 gigawatt for an hour. That would supply like 3 million UK households for an hour, for example, in operation worldwide. There was only 1 gigawatt scale facility. And Brian, 3 years later, there's 42.
Wow.
So that's kind of the scale that things are going, and that's going to continue to take off. So 5 times as many gigawatt projects are set to come online in the next couple of years. So 200 there should be in a couple of years from now. That's projects going on in the UK, the Netherlands, Chile, and the Philippines. So it's happening. Batteries are probably the biggest thing right now. I would say the biggest thing in the renewable transition to renewables.
Yeah. And on that good news, we're going to wrap up the show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, Clean Energy Pod, the Patreon that we've talked about. We've got a merch store as well. And remember to hit the subscribe or follow button on your podcast app, and you will get a new episode every week.
As always, thanks to our Patreon and Clean Club executive members, Brent Routley and Green Bastard. And thanks to everyone who are supporting us on Patreon. It makes a big difference to our show. You can do it for as little as $1 a month and get perks. So we'll see you again in 7 days.
See you next week.